Please be seated. The court is now back in session. I now hand over to the prosecution to continue his line of questioning.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Witness, you told the court that you had attended several banquets, film projections, and other events that were being held for foreign delegations. Now, during those occasions, did you regularly see the leaders of Democratic Cambodia?
Your Honors, before responding to the question, I would like to make a suggestion following my consultation with the Duty Council. I would like to clarify the term used, Director of Protocol. But in reality, back then I was in charge of one section within the protocol department, and there were people above me in that department. So if the word director as used was referred to somebody who oversaw the overall functioning of this department, that was not my responsibility, because I don't want people to be misled that I was the person who was in charge of that department. And if there was an interview with an inquiry, and in that interview it mentioned that I was alleged to be associated with the CIA, I would not be appointed to be somebody important in that department. But once again, I knew for myself that I would not stay in that ministry for long. So this is my clarification, and I would like to respond to the prosecution question as to whether I had met or seen the senior leaders of the Democratic Cambodia during the banquets or film screening or welcoming the foreign delegation. I did not see them often, because I met visitors, lower level visitors, but for those senior visitors, there were other people who were responsible for receiving them. There were people who were in charge of receiving foreign delegation, particularly those who could speak foreign languages and those who understood foreign affairs, who were tasked to welcome those high-level visitors.
You said that you very seldom saw the regime's leaders, aside from Son Sen and Ieng Sary, whom you knew. Did you know Pol Pot, Nuon Chea, and Khieu Samphan? Or did you know anyone else who held similar positions of the same rank?
Response. In the organizational structure of a government, I naturally knew the leadership of the structure, and I also met them during the banquet or conferences or high-level meetings, and I at times work as usher who introduce guests to the seat, so I met them. But once again, as for high-level task, it was handled by other people.
Did you know the exact titles of Pol Pot, Nun Chia, and Kyo Sampon?
But Skull, Tamriya.
Yes, I knew their titles through the open meetings or assemblies. We knew their title during the meeting, but we rarely met them in person because we had to work with the hierarchical structure. But we got to know their titles through the open meetings.
Pourriez-vous préciser
Could you please tell us what you know as the titles of those individuals you have just cited, so that it is absolutely clear?
Response. You are referring to the titles of those senior leaders? The President. The prosecution should ask questions with individual leaders one by one to make it precisely clear for the witness.
Merci.
Yes, very well, Mr. President. Therefore, what was the title and what were the functions of Mr. Pol Pot?
Response. The only thing I know is that he was the most senior person of the most senior person. That's all. But I don't know exactly what his rank or status could have been.
Qu'en est-il de Nun Chia?
And what about Nun Chia? Did you know what his title was, and do you know what his functions were? Obviously, as Director of Protocol, you had the responsibility of assigning them seats at performances and events. Therefore, do you know what his title was and what were his functions?
Response. Apart from Pol Pot, whom I told was the most senior leader, I only know the other persons as upper uncles, and I don't know their real functions for sure.
And as a party cadre, did you ever hear about an entity called the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cambodia?
Response. The term Central Committee was rarely used. I often heard about the term 87 used.
Saviez-vous où travaillait
Did you know where the senior leaders of Democratic Kampuchea worked? Were there very specific locations where they carried out their work and where they met? And again, I'm referring to Pol Pot, Nun Chia, Ieng Sary, and Kyo Sampan.
Response. I don't know. I think it is part of the very secret affair.
Je vais en venir à la
I wish to return to the topic of accompanying foreign delegations during their visits to Democratic Kampuchea. You said that you were often sent to work on the field and were assigned there for week-long events. Can you please tell us which foreign delegations you accompanied during this period from 1978 up until the arrival of the Vietnamese?
Response. I used to accompany people, including the Belgians, 3 Belgians, both male and female, but I don't recollect their names. I took them on 2 trucks. One truck was for catering services and one for accommodating the delegation, and there was a driver, a young driver, and I would be next to the driver taking the guests. The roads were not in good condition after the war. That's why I said it would take us 1 week or so to reach our destination.
Est-ce que vous vous souvenez?
Do you remember when this delegation comprised of 3 Belgian diplomats came to Democratic Kampuchea?
Lorsque vous visitiez le terrain,
And when you were on the field, what were you visiting exactly? Which regions were you traveling to with this Belgian delegation, for example? What kind of cell did you visit with the Belgian delegation?
Response. The most privilege we had was to take the delegations to visit Angkor Wat. That was the prime location. That's all.
d'accord, mais en chemin,
Very well, but en route to Siem Reap, did you stop off at any locations to conduct tours, to visit cooperatives, factories, workshops, anything of that kind?
Response. Our trip we rather would stop at Kampong Thom, where we would have some meals. Then we would move on all the way to Siem Reap with any other stops, because we had to make sure that we reached Siem Reap before the nightfall.
pour les besoins de la
For the record and to refresh the memory of the witness, there's a Phoebus document referenced under E375 and E345. That is dated August 1978. It makes frequent reference to the Belgian-Campuchian friendship delegation that took place in 1978. ERNs are 008935, 008940-42. Radio Phnom Penh had also broadcast news that the delegation had visited the central and northern regions, a pharmaceutical factory, a rubber factory in Shamkar, Angdong, as well as the 6th January dam. And according to this radio broadcast, the tour continued onto Takeo, then Kampong Sam, before returning to Phnom Penh. Now, Mr. Witness, what I've just described to you, does that illustrate a typical tour circuit that would be followed by a foreign delegation visiting democratic Kampuchea? Were there stops to these types of factories and dams?
Response. During each trip, even when we had only one visitor, and in the case when I was assigned to take the guests to Siem Reap, Angkor Wat, I would be assigned to accompany the guests, and the other people who would be assigned to take delegates to other directions. But my destination was mainly Siem Reap. So, for example, with regard to one visitor, there would be few people involved in taking the person to different places, but I was assigned to take the visitor to Siem Reap.
And among other foreign delegations, did you also accompany a Japanese delegation that was representing the Japanese-Kampuchean Friendship Group, traveling to the country in 1978?
Response. I don't think I remember them all.
Je voudrais, Monsieur le Président, pour rafraîchir la mémoire du témoin,
Mr. President, to refresh the memory of the witness and for this to be reflected in the record, I'd like to refer to a number of broadcasts that were aired on Japanese radio Kyoto on the 13th and 14th and 15th of October, and that are inscribed in Phoebus document D262.46 or E3/294. The name of the witness is mentioned a good number of times throughout this record, and with your leave, Mr. President, I would like to read two passages from this broadcast and ask for the witness's reaction to these passages.
The President, you may proceed.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais apporter une précision. En fait,
Thank you very much. Just a point of clarification.
The President, Council, International Co-Prosecutor, please make your point before we can proceed to Counsel for Nuon Chea.
oui, je voulais préciser que ce document
Yes, I simply wanted to clarify that this Phoebus document, which carries the ERN numbers 00170263 to 68, is comprised of Kyoto Tyoko radio broadcasts, which are also replicated in the BBC Summary World broadcast dated from 15th of October 1978, and which is referenced under document D108/28.318. I repeat, that document is D108/28.318, and that particular document does have a French translation. The French ERN number is 0079 34 98 to 99. And another passage is referenced under ERN numbers S00793503 to 05. In English, the BBC SWB document bears the reference number S00013184 to 85. And another passage is contained in S000131902192. Now, the first passage I wish to read, unless there are any objections.
The President, we note that Nuon Chea's counsel was on his feet, and the decision has already been rendered, but he was on his feet. We don't know what he would have to say. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no objection, but a request. It would be helpful for me if the extract the prosecutor is about to read, if that is put on the screen for the parties. Not for the witness, but for the parties. It's much easier for me to follow a quote if I can also read the quote.
Monsieur le Président, avec votre accord, nous allons essayer.
Mr. President, with your leave, we would be more than obliging to heed that request. The Khmer translation does not exist, but with your leave, and if this is of use to the parties, I have absolutely no objection to projecting the passages in question.
The President, you may proceed. You may ask your assistant to put up the portion you wish to cite to refresh the memories of this witness.
Merci. Alors, c'est le document.
Thank you very much. I'm talking about document D108/28.318. The ERN in English are 000-13-184 to 000-13-185, and in French, the ERN pages are S007934 98 to 99. The paragraph begins with the words "So Hong." I believe that it has just been found. The Japanese are reporting on their visit to democratic Cambodia.
En temps de guerre, notre guide
Our guide, Nikon, one of the senior public servants of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, indicated that there were difficult years when they were subsisting on tapioca and tiger meat in order to implement the policy of drastic ruralization and help them maintain their austere government policies. It appeared that these young revolutionaries trusted only those who were their compadres in the war of liberation.
Je voudrais demander à Monsieur le témoin si
Mr. Witness, does this passage accurately reflect what was said to the traveling Japanese delegation?
Response. The content I talked to the visitors could not be well recollected by me myself, but I received some instructions in which I had to convey concerning the victory we had, and we had to do that to the guests. And I was instructed, and I talked about this to the guests, but I cannot recall the details. I was just asked to tell the guests that we were proud to win the victory.
There's also an issue about drastic ruralization by the Cambodian Communist Party. Can you tell us about that policy?
Response. I cannot say anything about this because it is an explanation of a theory, and I am not able to do that.
I'd like to take you to a different extract from the same document. In English, it's page S000131990. In French, it's 00793503-204. And I think that the English page can be put up on the screen in the article, which has been written by the Japanese from the Cambodia-Japan Friendship Association under Mr. Kozo Sasaki, and I quote, Nikan, the Foreign Affairs Ministry official who accompanied us on our tour, said that most people, and here we're talking about the evacuation of Phnom Penh, most people left without resistance and were allowed to return to their former villages. He also told us of a redistribution several weeks later, apparently referring to the forced removal of the less cooperative capitalist classes. And further on, down the page, Nikon said that the problems Vietnam has had with its Chinese population have not touched Cambodia because all people in Cambodia, including the Chinese, are being treated equally. He admitted that those few who held special privileges in the pre-liberation days have had some problems adjusting, but stressed that in revolutionary Cambodia the privileges of the past are no longer valid. End of quote. Mr. Witness, my first question to you is that it says here that you talked about a redistribution of people who had been evacuated, and this is a few weeks after the evacuation of Phnom Penh. So what exactly do you mean by this term redistribution?
Response. The terms I used sometimes are consistent with what were written. The term redistribution was already indicated in my statement yesterday. The old people in the base who had the food would be asked to share their food supplies with the newcomers. So distribution here was meaning like that.
Vous-même, vous étiez...
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you were still in Sector 15 at that stage. Did you see people coming into the sector who had been evacuated from the different towns and cities? In the West Zone, sorry, in the Special Zone, in your Sector 15?
Response. I only saw people leaving Phnom Penh on National Road number 5, coming over to Sector 15, and I also saw people going on road number 4 and through the paddy fields.
Donc au secteur...
Okay, so in Sector 15 there were no evacuees who set themselves up in the village in Sector 15 that later became Sector 32. You didn't see any new people coming to settle there?
Response. I only saw people coming from Phnom Penh to settle there. They were received by the base people, and I did not see any other people from elsewhere other than from Phnom Penh.
Pourquoi dites-vous que les...
Why do you say that the privileged people who lived in Phnom Penh had trouble adjusting? That's what the Japanese say in their article anyway. Why did they have trouble adjusting to rural life?
Response. I think it's not difficult to respond. People who lived in the cities would not be the same as people who lived in the rural areas. People who used to live in the cities got used to their lifestyle in the city, and for that reason it would be difficult for them to adjust themselves into the rural life. Yesterday I mentioned already that normally, even in Phnom Penh, they lived in a small house. The houses belonged to them. But when they were evacuated into the rural areas, they had to settle in the new homes, which was not as easy as their old homes.
You told us that you went with a number of delegations to different parts of the country, especially Siem Reap, and to the base areas. During all of these visits in 1978, did you ascertain anything about the state of health of the inhabitants and the workers living in the base areas? What did you see in that particular respect concerning the state of health of all of these people?
Some
Response. To be more specific, I wish to make it clear that during my trips, when I accompanied visitors, I would take them to Angkor Wat. And through the course of my trip, we had to go through National Road number 6. And on the road, along the road, there were fewer people living there. So it would not be easy for me to understand the real situation of the inhabitants along the road. But I understood that the livelihood of the people after the war was not good. They did not have decent food, and since a lot of people had to be evacuated, and the influx of new people coming to the places also add a burden to these food problem.
Comment avez-vous remarqué que les habitants ne mangeaient
How did you actually see that these people weren't eating enough? And I'm talking about 1978 when you were doing your visits. What particular signs were there of the fact that people weren't getting enough to eat?
The signs which I considered as the basis for my conclusion was that the production yield was minimal, and yet there were many mouths to feed. That's why I drew that conclusion.
Were people thin as you saw them?
Chúng khởi về tôi
Generally, they were of the same condition, but I did not see the patient in the hospitals. But those whom I saw along the street were of similar condition.
Est-ce que vous faisiez chaque fois rapport aux supérieurs?
Did you report each time to your superiors about each one of your missions with foreign delegations?
Response. Generally, when there was a visit of guests, then there was a report, an oral report to the upper authority. For example, they would ask me how the visit of the guest was going and how the food was like when we served them. These kinds of things was the basis of the report for them.
Est-ce que vous avez jamais rapporté à vos supérieurs?
Did you ever report in writing to your superiors or orally at meetings the fact that the base people didn't have enough to eat?
Could you please repeat your question?
Est-ce qu'il vous est arrivé de rapporter
Did it ever happen that you reported to your superiors the fact that the base people didn't have enough to eat?
lorsque vous aviez constaté cela sur le terrain?
When you yourself had seen that out on your missions? And as I said, this could have been a written report or an oral report at a meeting.
Response. In the meeting, there were many items of the agenda, but I myself had raised once in a while the issue of food ration of the people at the base level, but I did not raise that issue frequently. It was in accordance with the situation when it was conducive to do so.
Coming back to the reports that you drafted on your visits, did you write them once you got back to Phnom Penh, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or did you do certain reports while you were still travelling and send them in by telegram?
Response. When I returned to the ministry, then I would prepare such reports. We did not send it through telegram at all.
Est-ce que, monsieur le témoin, vous aviez
Mr. Witness, did you accompany a delegation of Yugoslav journalists on a visit around the country at the start of 1978? Can you remember that?
I cannot recall every visit, but at that time there were, of course, Yugoslavian visitors. I cannot recall all the events, but I did accompany the Yugoslav visitors.
Merci. Je voudrais montrer.
Thank you. Mr. President, with your permission, I would like to show the witness a document and put it up on the screen, and I refer to E3 stroke 1112, which also carries reference D252.12. We have ERNs in English and Khmer, and I believe last week we got a French translation. In English, it's 0043, 48, 61 to 63. It's a 3-page document. In Khmer, 00020960 to 62. In French, 00 81 00 29 to 32. Mr. President, do I have your permission?
The President, you may proceed. Court officer is now instructed to take the document and present it to the witness. And assistant may project the document on the screen.
Alors, avant.
While we wait for that to go up on the screen, let me tell you that it's 2 telegrams, numbers 306 and 307, that are addressed to the for the attention of the well-respected Bang Van, or regarding 307, we know that this was received on the 15th of March 1978. Mr. Witness Nikon, you said that your alias was Gon, and you were, at least for a time, at the head of the Protocol Service of the Foreign Affairs Ministry. So I'd like to ask you if you sent these 2 telegrams to Brother Van in March 1978. Take your time to read the 2 telegrams and then give me your answer.
aussi le témoin. Est-ce que vous avez pu...
Witness, have you had time to look through this document? And can you tell me if you are the one who sent these 2 telegrams to Brother Van?
ក្រោយបានខ្ញុំ
Upon reading through this document briefly, I don't think that this document belonged to me, and I was not the one who authored this document either. Because I remember back then I did not have any position or so to undertake. So in short, I deny that this document belongs to me.
Est-ce que vous connaissez d'autres?
Do you know other people called Con in the protocol service of the Foreign Ministry who might have reported on interviews between journalists from Yugoslavia and individuals on work sites when they went there?
ស្គាល់មិនអស់ដែរ
I did not know or recall all of them, but I simply scanned through this document and looking at its substance, I don't think that the wordings were mine. And obviously I did not know foreign affairs, for example, things that happened in Thailand. It was beyond my knowledge at that time.
Est-ce que vous pourriez...
Well, could you at least tell us within the ministry who was known as Brother Van?
Brother Van at that time was referred to Ieng Sari.
តែមានឈ្មោះច្រើនបាន
But there were many names at that time. But back then I heard Brother Van who was referred to Ieng Sari.
And if you were not the person who penned these telegrams, can you please tell us, in spite of that, why it was important for the member of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to draft this telegram reporting the conversations that were being held between the Yugoslav journalists and others, and the questions that were being asked during these missions? Was it important at other occasions to report on the actions of foreigners visiting the country and reporting on the interviews that were being conducted?
Response. I stated earlier that for a visiting delegation was accompanied by other protocol officers. For example, I would accompany them to visit Siem Reap, but upon their return to Phnom Penh, then other groups would accompany them. So it was divided into different parts, and if it was within my responsibility, then I would report it but it was under other responsibility, then they would report it accordingly. That was the practice at that time. However, this practice was not actually written, or so it was based on the ability, the actual ability of individual groups and their impression of the visit, and sometimes they even report it orally.
Very well. I have another further 2 documents to put before the witness before we break for lunch. Mr. President, I'm referring to document E3/1113, which is also classified as D252.13, dated March 15th, 1978. This document is a telegram. It is telegram number 61, addressed on the 15th of March, 1978. It reports a visit being paid by Yugoslav journalists in the northwest zone of the country. Mr. President, do I have your leave to admit this document and to have it projected on the screen?
The President, you may proceed. Court officer, please take the document from the prosecution and present it to the witness.
Monsieur le témoin, si vous pouviez parcourir rapidement.
Mr. Witness, would you be so kind as to review this document and take note of the names which are referenced at the end of the document? And to be of assistance, all of the questions that were being asked by the Yugoslav reporters at the Trapping Ma Dam, where there were 20,000 people working. And the question being asked was relating to food, transporting workers, marriage, family visits. This is a summary of what this document contains. I'll allow you a few moments to review it.
Donc, est-ce que vous pourriez nous dire si...
Can you please confirm that it was you yourself who had drafted this telegram and addressed it to respected and beloved brother?
Response. It was long time ago, some 30 years past. So I cannot recall every task I undertook. But on the subject of accompanying the guests and the reports on the visit was drafted by me, yes, of course there was, but I could not recall every detail of it. But the essence of the report was basically the welfare of the visiting guest. And the report itself was my pure impression and observation of the visit. And when upon my return, I reported to the upper authority as to what the visit was like. And to my recollection, most of the time I reported orally, but in terms of telegram such as this, I cannot recall.
I understand that you do not remember if you were the person who drafted this telegram. But can I draw your attention to a note at the end of the telegram, just before the signature of Korn? It reads, "The other day, I wrote the report by pencil. Chin brought it to the base. Our compatriots have sent this telegram directly to Office 870. Now, regardless of who was the author of this telegram, can you please tell us, Mr. Witness, what is Office 870? Was the telegram destined for that office?
Response. Office 870 referred to the office of the upper echelon, but I normally call it Office 87, but of course it was referred to the office of the upper authority.
Est-ce qu'en règle générale,
And generally speaking, telegrams that were addressed to individual senior leaders had to necessarily go through Office 870 before arriving at their final recipient?
The President, witness, please hold on, because the counsel for Ieng Sary is on his feet. Counsel Kanavas, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't object earlier. I can see how the prosecutor wishes to engage in speculation with this particular witness. He needs to lay a foundation. He knows that there's no need to try to sneak this sort of information in. First, you should ask him whether he knows that he has any linkage with that particular office, and then whether he knows the protocol and whether he knows in specific to any particular document that he wished to raise with this particular witness, whether it was actually delivered to the recipient that may be copied on a document. But to simply try to get a witness to speculate is improper, and the gentleman should know this by now. Thank you.
The President, representative of prosecution, do you have anything to reply?
Mr. President, we only have 5 minutes remaining, and I do wish to project another documents. I don't wish to spend much time on this issue that was just raised. However, I will respond by saying the following. Were telegrams ultimately sent to 870 forced to go through office, or telegrams meant for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs supposed to go through Office 870? Can the witness answer that?
The President, counsel, you may proceed.
Again, I mean, this is why I raised my objection. Clearly, the gentleman knows that he hasn't laid a foundation. This is a slippery way of trying to get an information from any witness. Does this person actually know this information? He can pose that question. First, he began by reading a telegram, which, in my opinion, was rather sleazy. That's what I consider a sneaky way of trying to get information in before laying a foundation. He could have simply asked him if he knows what Office 870 is, if he knows how it operated, how he knows that information, and if telegrams were being used, what was the procedure? But to simply go out and read a document and then say, well, gee,
The President, can you please be more specific in your objection and be brief as well? And you should compose yourself, particularly you should be mindful of the words you use. They should be appropriate. So please be brief. You cannot be long-winded on the objection because we need to move more expeditiously. So please be brief on your objection. Enumerate the points you want to raise so that it allows the chamber to see whether or not your objection is sustained or not, so that the proceeding can move forward. And you should not advise other parties to frame their question because they may have their own ways and techniques in framing the questions to put to the witness.
Far be it for me to give advice to other counsel on how to frame a question. But when it comes to technique, one would expect someone of his caliber and his experience to know exactly how to comport himself and how to conduct examination of witnesses. He has not laid a foundation. There is a procedure, and I do get upset. When the gentleman...
The President, we do not get the main points of your objection. We want to get the point of your objection so that there is a basis for our ruling. And you see the time is now close to lunch break and we need to move forward. So we would like to know a specific reason for your objection.
The President is that he's asking the witness to speculate, that he hasn't laid a foundation, and that the technique that he's using is utterly improper, and the gentleman knows that. That's my objection, and I want a ruling on this. Otherwise, we can present to any witness any sort of information and get them to validate, because all we want to do is read a document into the evidence. This is improper.
The President, International Court Prosecutor, you are now advised to change your question. You may put a new question before we adjourn, and the witness is now advised not to respond to that question you put earlier on. And counsel is also advised to be precise and brief when making objection so that the chamber can rule upon immediately on the spot.
I will not dwell on this issue, Mr. President. I believe that I did lay the foundation by indicating the signature that is placed on the telegram. So I have one final question, because I do see that the hour is nearing noon. Mr. Witness, in December 1978, just prior to the Vietnamese attack, did you meet with an American journalist and a British professor? I'm referring here to Professor Caldwell and Ms. Becker. Were those two people among the three people that you, Mr. Witness, had met with in December 1978 before the arrival of the Vietnamese?
Response. I don't recollect this.
Est-ce que, Monsieur le Président, je pourrais...
Mr. President, do I have your leave to show the witness a document which is only a half page for the purpose of refreshing his memory? This is a telegram dated the 8th of December 1978. The author of this telegram, the authors are rather Kam and Mut, and they make direct reference to Professor Caldwell as well as Ms. Becker. This document is E3/1156, also classified under D256/13.14.
The President, you may proceed. The court officer is now instructed to bring the document from the prosecutor to the witness for examination.
Je vais laisser quelques secondes à Monsieur le
I will just allow the witness a few moments to review the document and have him tell the court whether or not he had the opportunity to meet with these individuals and whether he reported on this visit alongside his colleague Mut to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Monsieur le témoin, est-ce que vous avez...
Mr. Witness, have you been able to review this document, and can you tell the court who are the authors of this document? Can you please tell us who Khan and Mut are, who apparently drafted this document on the 8th of December 1978?
Response. I know the person by the name of Mut. At the ministry, he was called Mut. I think he is His Excellency Kit Chun. This is what I believe. I don't know whether I am right or wrong, but I know the person by the name Mut to be the person I mentioned. And I already indicated that my memory does not serve me very well because it was a long time ago and I have no plan to take any notes of the event, and I just remember what I can recall. Tamut was the one who took notes. He understood the languages and the subject of the debate, so he could accompany the people and at the same time took notes. I don't recollect everything, but since you already presented the document to me along with the names of individuals, and I agree that these people could have been there as indicated.
Est-ce que c'est vous qui êtes l'auteur de...
Were you the author of this document alongside Tamut? I'm not sure I clearly understood. Who met with this delegation of journalists and professors?
Response. As far as I remember having seen this document you presented to me and the old story, it was I and Tamut who jointly reported on the event. There were two people reporting on this. I just don't remember the details.
One final question, Mr. President. With respect to the content of this document, you state for the record that you were the co-author. Now, it is clear that the journalists had asked a great number of questions. They had made requests to travel to the border area. They had asked to travel to the countryside to witness the daily lives of country dwellers, to meet with cadres in all of the cities, and to visit cooperatives, to visit political prisons, to speak with individuals separately, to gain information on the Cham people, to gain information on executions, and to also meet with the leaders of the country, including the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, Ieng Sary, Son Sen, Kyo Panari, Ieng Tarit, Nun Chia, Sihanouk, Hu Yun, and Hu Nim. Mr. Witness, can you please describe to us the hierarchy to which you addressed all of these requests on behalf of this traveling delegation comprised of journalists and professors, and whether or not they were able to receive what they were asking for?
Response. I remember briefly. I don't think this request was significantly entertained. I only reported on this to the upper echelon who would make the final decision. That's all.
Je vois qu'il est temps, Monsieur le Président.
I see, Mr. President, that it is the appropriate time for the noon break. I wish to thank you, Mr. President, Your Honors, and the witness for your patience. Thank you very much.
The President, thank you. It is now an appropriate time for lunch adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn for this time, and the next session will be resumed by 1:30. Court officer is now instructed to assist the witness, his duty counsel, during lunch break, and have the witness return to the courtroom by 1:30. Counsel for Nuon Chea, you may now proceed.
Thank you very much. I would like to make the usual request for the usual reasons for my client to follow the rest of the proceedings from the holding cell this afternoon.
The President, thank you, and please be seated. The Chamber has noted a request by counsel for Nuon Chea asking that Mr. Nuon Chea be permitted to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the remainder of the day. Counsel for Nuon Chea has already made it clear that they would proceed with the production of the waiver to the President signed by Mr. Nuon Chea. The Chamber grants such request. Mr. Nuon Chea is now allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the remainder of the day. He has already explicitly waived his right to be present in the courtroom. The Chamber instructs counsel for Nuon Chea to produce this waiver signed or given thumbprint by Mr. Nuon Chea to the Chamber immediately. AV booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the audio-video links are connected to the holding cell so that Mr. Nuon Chea can observe the proceedings from the cell for the remainder of the year, of the day. Security personnel are now instructed to bring the accused persons to the holding cell and have Mr. Kyusampon alone return to the courtroom in the afternoon session when the court resumes at 1:30. The court is adjourned.